Let me introduce myself. My name is Aarya, and I'm the president of Irvine Talks. But you probably already know that because all I do is talk about this event to literally anyone that comes within 5 feet of me. If you don't believe me, just ask my board after the event. They will testify towards it. It's a whole thing. Since sophomore year, I've watched countless performers come to this very stage, their hearts full of courage, and share their stories. I've gone home raving about Irvine Talks to literally anyone that comes near me. But for some reason, I can't begin to explain how much I don't want to disclose the parts of myself. For someone who's been preaching vulnerability for the past several years, I'm awful at actually basking in it myself. I'm a fraud. I've stopped taking risks and I've become terrified of change. Terrified that I will do or say something that will change people's perception of me. For the past 4 years, I've put other people's opinions on a higher pedestal than my own. And in doing so, I've buried my emotions so deep down that it's become a habit for me to hide them, because I've found comfort in being invisible. But tonight, in an effort to take the next step towards vulnerability, I'm going to be disclosing some parts of myself. So, here's me taking a chance. A few weeks before the Thanksgiving break of 2013, my stomach began feeling sick. After I was taken to the urgent care, I was diagnosed with a case of bad stomach and a cure of Miralax. I was oblivious to the fact that this pain was only the start of my journey of multitudes of doctor visits, treatment plans, and dietary restrictions. A few weeks had passed, and it was now Thanksgiving break. That Thanksgiving, I could barely digest the pie because every time I would, within 5 minutes taking a bite, I had the uncontrollable urge to go unload everything in the bathroom. Essentially, I felt as though Hulk were grabbing my stomach and squeezing it with full force. My parents took me to a local hospital, CHOC, or as I used to call it, Chocolate Hospital, to visit a GI specialist. GI standing for gastroenterologist. Please just never ask me to spell that word out loud, I won't be able to. After being put on steroids and facing its side effects, a chubby face, weak muscles, and constant shivering, my parents eventually pulled me out of swim lessons because, forget swimming, I could barely get ready for school in the morning without having to sit down every 5 minutes. I had lost 20 pounds, couldn't digest a meal without puking it all out, and my body temperature dropped so low that I had to wear 2 layers of socks on my feet around the house, otherwise my teeth would start chattering. My deteriorating health continued until January 6th, 2014, where through a colonoscopy, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. There were 2 things that the doctor said which affected me the most. Number 1, Crohn's is considered an autoimmune disease, which meant that it would stay with me for the rest of my life, with periods of remission, broken with unexpected periods of flare-ups, especially when I was stressed or anxious. And number 2, Crohn's is considered one of the invisible diseases. That means that on the outside, I look like a normal girl with no problems or issues, while on the inside, my immune system constantly attacks the healthy cells in my colon. Now, the second piece of news made me happy, if anything. I didn't have to worry about someone seeing me as a sick person. I just wanted it all to be over so I could go back to being normal. I was so afraid that someone would treat me abnormal if they knew what exactly was going on with me. And that alone was all I needed to hear to keep my story hidden. My treatment plan started almost immediately afterwards to cure my severe flare-up. From pills every day to acupuncture to more pills and then infusions, the ups and downs felt incredibly overwhelming at times. Every time I switched over to a new treatment plan, I'd hold some hope that maybe, finally, this would be the treatment plan that would work for me. Eventually, anti-inflammatory infusions began to work. They gave me biscotti cookies during my break. I spent the remaining years of my middle school maintaining a stable treatment of infusions every 6 weeks while tucking away the memories of my diagnosis. I'd cringe whenever my parents brought up the subject, and if someone asked me why I was getting an infusion, I'd respond, just some stomach issues, don't worry about it. When I entered middle school, I finally had the chance to start fresh. Every person who had seen me sick in elementary school was no longer there with me for my middle school. I could basically make up my own personality, and no one would know or care because, well, they didn't know me. I slowly morphed into a version of myself that felt great on the outside, but was the utter lie of who I truly was on the inside. I think I may have told 2 people during middle school about my diagnosis, and that too, a brief surface level conversation that ended in 10 seconds and went somewhat like, oh, by the way, I have this stomach disease. It's not like contagious or anything, I swear. I'm totally fine now. Because, after all, starting the conversation with, hi, I'm Aarya, and I have an autoimmune disease called Crohn's, never felt like the perfect icebreaker. And so, by the time I entered high school, my disease had truly become invisible. I didn't talk about it because I didn't want pity or worse, someone thinking I was weird. I somehow convinced myself that I was better keeping off my struggles all to myself. Because at what point would I be too much? At what point would my problems and my insecurities and my struggles be too much for someone I loved to handle? It was so much easier keeping it all tucked away so no one could see what I was going through. And so I did. And at first, it started off with me hiding the details about my diagnosis, but then it slowly morphed into me hiding everything. Bad grades in fear that I'd be viewed as dumber, problems in friendships in fear that I'd be labeled overdramatic, and insecurities about my body image and my skin color, because I just didn't think anybody would understand what I was going through. And at a certain point, I could barely recognize myself anymore, because I had fully become invisible. It wasn't until I attended Irvine Talks my sophomore year that I realized how much I needed to share my story. I recall sitting in the audience, listening to a speech that mirrored a story so similar to mine that I began to well up in tears as chills prickled across my entire body. The same feelings about our diagnosis and the same frustration with keeping our story hidden. It was the first time in years where I felt an emotion so intrinsically vulnerable. The first time in years where I no longer felt isolated. The first time in years where I finally felt like I was at home. And so, after that chapter, I decided to take a chance on vulnerability, and I began sharing. I began talking to my parents about how difficult it was at times to have to keep my struggles hidden with my diagnosis. I began talking to my friends about the details of my Crohn's, and I even recall sitting in front of 30 ASB members, all who I was incredibly intimidated of at the time, and talking to them about the frustration with my invisibility. But most importantly, tonight, I'm here at Irvine Talks, Chapter 5, Pieces of Me. Woo! And let me tell you something, it feels incredibly uncomfortable to be up here. Every time I start talking about my diagnosis, my heart begins beating faster and faster, and my voice begins to stutter. But at the same time, it also feels so incredibly gratifying, like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I no longer feel like this completely unknown human being inside my body. I'm realizing that people do care, that I can wholeheartedly be myself around them. Rather than projecting me, they've shown me love and compassion, not despite my story, but because of it. And as I've become more and more involved within Irvine Talks, I've realized how much we need a night of human connection. We need a night to remind us that we're not so alone in our struggles and our feelings of isolation, because Irvine Talks is bigger than each and every one of us here tonight. As a society, we have stopped being vulnerable. We've stopped listening to the stories around us, but even more so, we've stopped sharing them. We've drawn so many lines and become so quick to judge that we've stopped connecting. Tejas, the first president of Irvine Talks, said the words that continue to ring in my ears. If I know you, how can I hate you? So make me know you. Share a passion. Tell me what you love. I want to know you down to the core because there is something so breathtakingly beautiful in stripping down and becoming vulnerable. I think as scared as we are to share our stories, deep down inside, we want to share them. We want to feel heard. And that's the difficult thing with vulnerability, the possibility of rejection, because it's sharing the parts of your life that you feel are easier to pretend don't exist. I think for the longest time in my life, I was so afraid to share the messiest parts of my life because I was so afraid that it just wouldn't be accepted with love. In a world that was moving so fast around me, where the people were changing so quickly, I never found the right moments to process and reveal who I truly was. I never found the right moments to figure out how I truly felt. And I think that's a struggle that all of us here tonight deal with, even if it's really hard and scary to admit for some of you. But every once in a while, a window opens up, and the right people enter your life. It's in between the moments when you're up late talking to someone that you love, or when you're on a car drive late at night, that you choose to reveal a part of yourself. You choose to say, here, these are for you, and this is who I am. Maybe it's sharing something as small as, here's a song I like, why don't we listen to it together? Maybe it's even bigger than that. Maybe it's sharing an insecurity, saying, I don't like the way that I look. I wish I was skinnier, and I wish I was paler. But sometimes it's even bigger than that. Sometimes it's saying, I love you, and I want you to know that I care about you. Here, take these pieces of me in blindness to how the person will react. It's in these moments that we realize what it truly feels like to simply be human. I am slowly learning how to accept the beautiful mess that life is, how to live and grow despite the chaos that my life entails, how to break away from the people that make me feel like I'm too much, how to hug the pieces of my life back together. I'm slowly learning that some seasons are not meant for achieving or impressing. Some seasons are simply meant for learning and growing. But most importantly, I'm slowly learning to love the person that I'm becoming. So, let me reintroduce myself. Hi, my name is Aarya, and I have an autoimmune disease called Crohn's. I don't talk about it very often, but tonight, I choose to accept this piece of me. Tonight, I choose to accept all the parts of me that I've discarded for so long. Tonight, I choose to make the invisible visible.
5 years ago, Irvine Talks was founded, celebrating the power of human connection.
Tonight, 5 years later, we hope that you found pieces of yourself within each of these beautiful stories.
We hope that you make Irvine Talks more than just one night, and that you let yourself feel.
Because vulnerability is hard, it's inconvenient, and above all, it's terrifying.
But vulnerability starts with you. It starts when you take the first step, when you leave this auditorium.
We know we'll keep on telling stories wherever we go, and we hope you will too.
This is Irvine Talks. These are the pieces of us. And we hope that these stories are now the pieces of you.